There is a truth that most people do not want to admit. You are not poor because you lack effort. You are poor because you were taught to see the world through eyes that no longer fit. That sentence felt like a gentle tap on the foggy glass in front of me, the glass I had stood behind for years, watching others move forward while I kept wrestling with the bills dropped into my mailbox each morning, heavy like nameless stone. In the big cities of America, especially when the cold season begins, people can see their breath rising in a pale mist, but I could see something else more clearly. It was the breath of exhaustion, a breath so habitual that no one noticed it anymore. In countless conversations I overheard, in coffee shops or on trains, people talked about how hard they were trying. They lifted the weight of discipline like a ritual, worked extra hours, read books about making money, and still ended the day with a sense of falling behind. What confused them was not poverty, but imbalance. They gave so much and received so little. I once believed the world worked in a natural cycle. Do the right things, do enough, and one day the door would open. But I realized that door never opens by itself. It opens only for those who see its true nature. Its nature is not fairness. Fairness is a beautiful story told when we are young. But when we grow up, when we step into offices glowing through the night, into financial buildings where people sip coffee like drinking plain water, I saw something different. The rich do not wait for their turn. They bend, they twist, they maneuver, and sometimes they stay silent in a frightening way, as if they already know every outcome. And others, like I once was, spend their whole lives standing in line, afraid to upset anyone, afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of being seen as impolite, and in the end, lock themselves inside a box called hope. One day, I sat in a small bar on a Brooklyn corner, the warm yellow light falling onto the wooden table making everything slow down. I watched an older man sitting at the end of the counter. He did not talk much, almost not at all. Others laughed loudly, told stories, tried to prove they knew something, but he only watched. And the strange thing was, the quieter he was, the more others opened up, exposing things they did not need to say. It was as if his silence was a force pulling tiny secrets straight out of their mouths. In that moment, I understood something. In the game of power, the one who talks the most is often the weakest. From that moment, I began to sense the world through a different light. I realized most people live by reflex, not by awareness. They react to pressure, to expectations, to the fear of not being recognized. But those who rise higher can stand outside those reflexes, as if they are watching from a third-floor window, looking down at the crowd pushing below. On the outside, they seem ordinary, sometimes even lazy or indifferent. But inside, they calculate every step, every glance, every moment of silence. They do not chase opportunity. They let opportunity run toward them, then choose it the way one chooses a glass of wine to pair with dinner. And then, one long evening later, I asked myself what kept me in the same place. Was it because I was not smart enough? No. I had always been among those who did everything well. Was it because I lacked luck? Maybe. But luck is never something you can pick up and set down. Was it because society is unfair? That is true too. But if I blamed everything on society, I would hand over my power to something I could not control. The deeper, harsher, and truer answer was this. I had lived like someone waiting to be recognized, waiting to be called, waiting for someone to notice my effort. And that waiting tied my feet like a soft rope, light but strong enough that it never broke. When I realized that, it felt like unlocking the first door of a long hallway. Inside that hallway were many rooms, many rules, many dark corners I once feared to enter. But the strangest thing was the feeling of lightness. It felt like I no longer needed to run. I just needed to see things clearly before stepping forward. I began to observe how people react when rejected, how their voices shift when they fear losing something, how a small frown can reveal more than a long explanation. And I saw the truth I had always overlooked. Strength is not in loudness. Strength is in controlling what others cannot. From that point on, I understood that the first step out of poverty is not earning more. It is stepping out of the identity of someone who lives in reaction instead of observation. It is knowing how to step back, separate yourself from the rushing water, and watch the way it moves. Only when you see that flow can you understand that swimming is not the only way. Sometimes you need to find a rock to stand on and let the water flow around your feet. That journey has only begun. But right at the entrance, it gave me a lesson no one had ever stated clearly. If you want to change your life, you must change the eyes you use to see the world before changing anything else. And once those eyes open, they will never see anything the same again. Since the moment I realized the thin layer of fog that had been covering my eyes, I began to look deeper into the small movements I once thought were nothing but coincidence. On the street I walked every morning, I saw a group of people waiting for the bus, each face showing something: worry, irritation, impatience. With just a glance, I could guess who was in a rush, who feared being late, who had gone through a sleepless night. They had no idea that every expression was speaking for them, leaking information to anyone willing to listen. And in that moment, I remembered the eyes of the man in the bar, the way he observed, without revealing a single beat of emotion. He was not better than them. He was only more concealed. And perhaps that very concealment was what placed him in a completely different position. I began to experiment with that in myself. Instead of reacting instantly every time something touched a nerve, I held it for one breath. When someone told me something unpleasant, I did not rush to defend or explain. When someone asked about my plans, I did not answer right away. At first, that silence made me feel awkward, like wearing an oversized coat without knowing where to place my hands. But then I noticed something interesting. The quieter I became, the better I heard. Not only what people said, but what they tried to hide. What slipped out in the weight of their voice, in the way their eyes shifted to the right, or the way they inhaled deeper than usual. I realized that before, I talked too much to ever be still enough to listen. One morning, when I stepped into the elevator at work, a familiar coworker smiled at me. I returned a small smile, not too warm, not too distant. And then he started talking a lot, sharing about the frustrations in his project, about someone on the team who was not cooperating, about an opportunity he thought the boss was considering for him. I had not asked. I had not nudged. But with just a few seconds of silence, I made him open up like a book, waiting for someone to turn the pages. I stood there, listening, observing. And when the elevator door opened, I knew more about his motives than what he had spoken. What stood out to me was not his story, but the way his tone shifted every time he mentioned a rival in the office. It showed me who he feared, who he disliked, what he wanted, and most importantly, where he was weak. From that moment, I understood a truth I had never clearly grasped. Successful people are not necessarily stronger, but they read others so quickly that those people never realize they have been seen through. Because humans, when unaware of how to hide, expose their minds long before they think. And those who can read that, if they choose, can turn everything in their favor. The deeper I went into this awareness, the more the world felt like a stage where everyone was acting in a play without a script. They act to be accepted, to be liked, to avoid judgment. But that acting hides nothing. It only sharpens the layers beneath, revealing delicate cracks like the ones on an old crystal cup. One night, as I sat by the window of my small apartment, watching the streetlights fall on a sidewalk covered with leaves, I asked myself what would happen if I stopped letting others read me so easily. What would happen if I did not let my emotions show on my face, even before I understood what I was feeling? I began to still my face, as if it were a lake, trying to hold each ripple in silence. Sometimes the answer is not what matters most, but the way you place it at the moment others need it. One day, in a tense meeting, a coworker asked for my opinion on the issue being debated. All eyes turned toward me. Instead of speaking immediately, I held a small pause, just long enough to silence the room, just long enough to make people wonder what I was thinking. That pause gave me a choice, gave me the role of the one directing the air. When I spoke, I felt like I was placing stones into a stream, watching the ripples spread. And what I realized was this: sometimes the answer is not what matters most, but the way you place it at the moment others need it. That moment made me see that I had stepped into a new territory. Not a territory of great power, but a territory of subtle awareness, where people stop reacting through emotion and begin to live through observation. And living through observation made me see clearly what I had always sensed but never named. This world does not belong to those who reveal every thought. It belongs to those who know how to blur their edges, who know how to appear just enough, who know how to stay silent at the right time, who know how to leave a space that others must fill on their own. Slowly, I understood that to stand in a different place, I did not need to prove I was smarter. I only needed to learn how to keep others from guessing me. Because the one who cannot be guessed is the one who cannot be pulled into someone else's game. The one who cannot be guessed is the one who chooses their own game. That moment made me see that I had stepped into a new territory. Not a territory of great power, but a territory of subtle awareness, where people stop reacting through emotion and begin to live through observation. And living through observation made me see clearly what I had always sensed but never named. This world does not belong to those who reveal every thought. It belongs to those who know how to blur their edges, who know how to appear just enough. There are days when I feel time moving one beat slower, slow enough that I can see each small shift inside my own mind. Gone is the familiar rush I once lived with, the one that made me react only because I feared falling behind. Now, every morning when I wake up, I stand by the window, looking out at the neighborhood as it brightens, listening to the sound of engines rising from the cold and damp streets. That moment feels like a reminder. The world is always moving, but I do not have to run at its pace. I can create my own rhythm as long as I am patient enough. Patience, a word that sounds simple, but can turn a life toward completely different paths. I once thought patience meant waiting, enduring, holding back so I would not lose my chance. But the more I observed, the more I slowed down, the more I saw that patience is not stillness. It is the ability to hide your step before placing it on the ground. It is like standing behind a one-way glass. You can see everyone, but no one can see what you are preparing. That afternoon, an old friend invited me to a small diner near Midtown. He works in finance, always busy, always in a rush. As soon as we sat down, he unloaded a series of decisions he had just made. Buying a stock because of something he read online. Changing jobs because friends said the new place paid faster. Signing a contract out of fear of missing the golden moment. I listened but said nothing. I only watched the way his eyes darted with each thought, as if every idea was a rapid current pushing him forward. He asked what I thought. I only shrugged. And in that moment, I saw him pause. Just for an instant. But for someone like him, someone who lives in a constant state of do it now, close it now, do not miss it, that pause was like a tiny crack on stone, a crack that revealed what lay under all the rushing. Fear. Fear of not keeping up. Fear of falling behind. Fear that others would rise while he stayed still. And the irony was that the more he feared being left behind, the faster he ran, without seeing where he was going. That evening, I walked home. The air was sharper than usual. Yet I felt comfortable. Each step touched a new empty space in my mind, making me realize that patience is not a road to delay, but the only road that avoids mistakes. This world seems fast, but in reality, it belongs to those who watch the movement of others and choose a moment so quiet that no one can predict it. People call that luck. But if you look closely, there is nothing lucky about that quiet preparation. I also began to notice something strange. The more patient I became, the more clearly I understood the people around me. I saw what scared them, what hurried them, what they wanted through words they did not know they had blurted out. A coworker restless over news of a company restructuring. A friend suddenly buying a new car to cover an uneasiness growing inside. A neighbor changing jobs constantly because he could not stand being alone with himself. Each person had a fear, and in their rush, they revealed all of it. Sometimes, in those quiet spaces, I felt like I was walking deeper into a room I had never noticed before. A warm, dim light revealed uneven paint on the walls, corners I had always passed without seeing. In that room, I understood that most people live as if they are being chased by voices that are not real. The voices of the crowd, of trends, of promises of quick wealth. The voice of the fear of not being enough. And those voices drown out the most important one. Their own intuition. That was when I saw that I had changed. Not a grand change, but a change in the way I handled each small wave inside. Before, if someone said something I did not like, I reacted immediately. If an opportunity flashed, I jumped. Now, I hold everything in a small pause, enough for emotion to settle, enough for reason to touch the surface of the problem, enough for me to see whether I wanted something because it was right, or simply because I feared losing it. In that quiet space, I began to feel stronger, like a heavy tree with deep roots that do not move with every passing breeze. And then, one evening, as I was writing a few notes in a small notebook, I suddenly thought about the people listening to this story, the people who might stumble into the video or might be feeling what I once felt. I wondered if they had ever sensed that their rush did not come from a real need, but from some invisible pressure. If they had ever realized they made decisions only because they feared being late in life. If someone has felt that, perhaps they know the feeling of learning to slow down, to look deeper into themselves. And if they want to share that feeling, even in one short comment, I think it might help them feel less alone. And if they want to stay and listen longer, they can follow, as a way to remind themselves that they are changing little by little. Not an advertisement, not an invitation, just an open door for those who want to walk along. Slowly, I realized patience was no longer a skill. It had become a way of living, a way that kept me from being pushed by the pace of others, a way that helped me see a bigger picture. True opportunity does not appear in noise. It appears in a small moment of quiet when everyone else is distracted. And whoever has the patience to stand there, to listen, and to recognize it first, that person will have what others call luck. That was when all the pieces began to shift, quietly but surely, leading me to a place I never thought I could reach. A place where I no longer chase the world, and instead allow the world to reveal the weaknesses in its movements. The slower I lived, the more clearly I saw something I had only felt vaguely before. In this world, effort does not decide your position. Position decides the value of your effort. I remember the first time I realized this, as clearly as the neon lights reflecting off the Manhattan streets after work. People were sweating, rushing to meet targets, trying to do better than the day before. Yet the value they created flowed toward a different place, a different person, a higher level they had never stepped into. That evening, I sat in my small kitchen, listening to the steady hum of the refrigerator. I put my notebook down, closed my eyes, and thought about the years that had passed. How many times I believed hard work would take me far. How many times I tried to do more, learn more, prove that I deserved to be seen. But the harder I worked, the more I stayed in the position someone else had chosen for me. A position where every drop of my sweat turned into benefit for someone standing above. Only when I began observing others, the wealthy, the successful, the influential, did I see that the difference was not in how hard they worked, but in where they stood. They were not always smarter, and they were certainly not always kinder, but they chose places where the efforts of others naturally flowed toward them, like water finding its way to the lowest point. They did not run the race. They built the road for others to run on their behalf. One late winter afternoon, I was assigned to attend a meeting with the board of directors. I was only there to take notes. But in that room, I saw the principle of power most clearly. The leaders were not the ones doing the most work. They only asked one question at the right moment, gave one short instruction, then let others struggle with the rest. Each member of the team, no matter how skilled, was using their strength to push a wheel someone else was holding by the axle. I stood in a corner, watching everything, and realized that leverage is not a tool. It is a position, and a position is never given. It is taken. After the meeting, I walked alone through the park, where metal benches grew cold under the falling night dew. I sat on an empty bench and looked up at the gray sky. I thought about people who were working tirelessly without knowing for whom they were creating value. I thought about myself, all those years of effort without understanding why I remained at the starting point. And, in the quiet of the nearly empty park, an answer slowly formed. The poor do not lose because they lack ability. They lose because they stand in the wrong place. And what does standing in the wrong place mean? It means treating your time as your only asset. It means selling it hour by hour, day by day, month by month, hoping that one day a salary will be enough to change your life. But time is the one thing that cannot multiply. The wealthy never use it to trade for money. They use systems, ideas, positions to turn the time of others into a constant flow that sustains them. Once you see this, everything becomes clear, like a map that had been covered in dust too long. Another afternoon, I sat in my usual coffee shop, where the windows always fogged up in the cold season. Two people were talking at the next table. One was an employee complaining about overtime. The other was a small business owner talking about expanding his new product line. Both worked hard, but the difference was undeniable. One was selling his time. The other was building a position where the time of others would soon flow toward him. That flow is so subtle that if you do not observe closely, you might think they are the same. I went home that night feeling as if I had seen another layer of the world. These layers never reveal themselves to those who are running. They appear only when you stand still long enough to see the structure beneath the movement of society. I realized that if I wanted to change my life, I had to find a way to stand where the efforts of others would naturally come toward me, not by command, but by creating value so significant that others could not advance without passing through me. From then on, I began to change the way I looked at work. I no longer thought of overtime as sacrifice. I no longer saw praise from a boss as a reward. I started asking myself, does this create leverage for me or only strengthen someone else's position? Am I building something for myself or enriching someone I have never met? Those questions appeared every day, in every small choice, in every conversation that seemed harmless, and slowly, they pulled me away from the path I had walked for years. One night, looking in the mirror, I realized my eyes were no longer the same. No more confusion, no more vague fear. Instead, there was a quiet sharpness, like someone who had just stepped into the hidden room of the world. I no longer wanted to chase success built by others. I wanted to create a position where success would find its way to me. And from that moment, I knew I was getting closer to something I once never dared to dream of. A life not just lived, but designed. Ever since the night I looked in the mirror and realized my eyes had changed, everything around me began to take on a new layer of meaning. I no longer saw people through what they said, but through what they believed. And I noticed something almost strange. This world does not run on truth. It runs on stories told convincingly enough. Stories shape things, create value, even create the dreams people chase for a lifetime without knowing they are running after a carefully crafted illusion. I remember the first time this became clear. It was a quiet afternoon in an old bookstore near where I lived. Thin gold light fell through the window onto dust-covered wooden shelves. A young man walked in, wearing a thick gray sweater and holding a cup of cold coffee. He went straight to the counter and scanned a black-covered book. I did not know the content, but I heard him tell the cashier that the book was trending, that everyone was reading it. That sentence echoed in my mind for a long time. Everyone is reading it. 3 small words, but carrying the weight of an entire collective story. No one knew why it was popular. No one verified its value for themselves. But once the story became large enough, it turned into a truth that needed no proof. I stood beside a shelf, flipped open a random page of another book, and felt a shiver run through me. How many things in my life had I believed in that exact way? How many choices had come from a story someone else told? How many values had I chased just because everyone thought so? When I left the store, the cold wind struck my face like it was waking me from a long sleep. Suddenly, I realized something. Everything of value needs a strong story to support it. Luxury cars do not sell metal. They sell the feeling of being seen. Fashion brands do not sell fabric. They sell an identity people want to wear. Even a social media post can sell belief. The belief that someone else's life is prettier, fuller, more worth living. And people, no matter how smart, slip easily into those stories like sinking into a soft chair in a warm room where no one wants to stand up and face the cold truth outside. From then on, I began recalling moments in my life where stories had steered me without my awareness. Like the time I bought a ridiculously expensive pair of shoes just because the brand had appeared in a movie I loved. Or the time I rushed into an investment simply because the person introducing it looked trustworthy. I thought I made those decisions rationally, but in reality, I had been pulled into a story, just like thousands of others. One evening, sitting in my usual coffee shop and watching people come and go, I saw this truth more clearly than ever. A young woman walked in, her blonde hair tied neatly behind her, her long cream coat fitting perfectly on her slim frame. She ordered a latte, sat near the window, and opened her laptop. I did not pay much attention until she paused, adjusted the ring on her finger so it caught the light. That moment was enough for me to understand. She was not just there to work. She was performing her own story, a story of independence, modernity, an image she wanted others to see every time she lifted her latte. And strangely, as long as she believed in that story, it became real enough for those around her to fall into. In the days after, I began noticing stories like quiet currents. At work, I saw people get promoted not because they were the best, but because they told the best story. A story of vision, discipline, and value. In life, I saw products being hunted because the story around them turned them into treasures. In relationships, I saw attraction coming not from essence, but from the image someone crafted at first glance. From these realizations, I turned back to myself. I asked what story I was telling about my own life. A story of waiting, of fear, of the worry that I was not enough, or the story of someone who stands outside the current, observing and choosing? That question made me stop writing for hours, the notebook lying open, because the answer was not simple. Another evening, I sat by the river, watching city lights ripple on the water. I realized that if I did not tell my own story, the world would tell it for me. And the world never tells it in a way that benefits the one who stands still. Stories are crafted by people who understand the power of words, of images, of appearing at the right moment, and they are the ones who make the crowd believe what they want the crowd to believe. Sitting there, I pulled out my phone and typed one short sentence into my notes. Value does not come from truth, but from what people believe is true. A simple line, but like a door opening into another hallway of awareness. If story is the strongest currency, then what story could I choose to tell? What could I turn into reality simply by making it convincing enough? The answer grew clearer in the days that followed, when I found myself no longer wanting to chase objective truth. I wanted to read the movements inside people, to understand what makes them believe, what makes them hesitate, what makes them open their wallet, open their heart, or open a door of opportunity. I slowly realized that the one who knows how to tell a story does not just create value, they guide the direction of that value. And in that silence, I knew I had stepped onto another level. I was no longer just standing in the right place. I was beginning to create a gravity that made others turn toward me. Ever since I understood the power of story, every movement around me suddenly became sharper, as if someone had adjusted the lens I used to look at life. Small behaviors, reactions that once seemed accidental, all carried a layer of meaning I had overlooked. And within those layers, I saw something I once feared naming. Opportunity often lies in the empty spaces the crowd forgets, not the opportunity to deceive or harm, but the opportunity to recognize value, still sleeping inside fear, confusion, or the inconsistencies of human nature. That evening, I walked down a familiar street near the East Village. Small bars were opening their doors, the sound of conversations blending with the soft music drifting from behind the glass. A group of students sat on the sidewalk, laughing loudly and arguing about their housing contract. Their voices showed their uneasiness. Fear of rising rent, fear of not finding a new place, fear of being pressured into terms they did not understand. I paused for a moment, not because I wanted to listen, but because I suddenly noticed something. Their fear created an empty space, a space someone sharp enough could step into and guide them toward a decision that benefited themselves. It was not a cruel thought. It was simply how economic interaction works. Whoever understands the empty spaces of others has the power to shape the result. That evening, I walked down a familiar street near the East Village. Small bars were opening their doors, the sound of conversations blending with the soft music drifting from behind the glass. A group of students sat on the sidewalk, laughing loudly and arguing about their housing contract. Their voices showed their uneasiness. Fear of rising rent, fear of not finding a new place, fear of being pressured into terms they did not understand. When I realized that, I looked back at moments in my life when I missed opportunities not because I lacked ability, but because I reacted too quickly or revealed too much. I had exposed plans before they were ready just to feel understood. I had shared important intentions with people who had no reason to know. And every time, I gave away my advantage without noticing. I remember clearly one afternoon at work when I overheard colleagues discussing candidates for a management position. A few names were mentioned, and in that moment, I knew the opportunity was right in front of me. But I said nothing. I did not hint. I did not boast. I did not try to impress. I simply observed. I listened to who was worried, who was confident, who was acting, who was showing off. And strangely, in my silence, I saw their weaknesses more clearly than their words revealed. One wanted power too much. One feared responsibility. One desired promotion only to affirm self-worth. And I, for the first time in my life, felt I did not need to run. I only needed to stand in the right place, at the right moment, and let everything rotate around the new axis I was quietly building. The deeper I went into this observation, the more I understood that exploitation is not cruelty the way most people imagine. It is simply the ability to see what others do not see. When the market panics, people begin to sell everything because they fear losing more. But someone who understands the flow sees that moment as the chance to buy, staying calm while the surface around them breaks into waves. When people chase a new trend because they are afraid to fall behind, the clear-minded person stands outside, waiting for the fever to cool, then steps in with calculated calm. Exploitation is not taking advantage of people. It is understanding how fear drives action. And to understand that is to understand how the world works. But the more I recognized the power of reading those empty spaces, the more I understood a deeper truth. To keep my position, I had to hold back. Hold back my words, my plans, my deepest wants. People believe that opening up creates connection, but opening up carelessly only exposes weaknesses others can press whenever they wish. I once wanted to share every plan with someone I trusted, but later I saw that the most important plans need a quiet, hidden space to grow, like seeds needing darkness before they meet light. One fall evening, as cold winds slipped through the gaps in the door, I met an old friend at a small bar where we had sat many times. He asked what I had been doing lately, whether I had new projects, whether I had plans to share. But this time, I only smiled, said a few important things, just enough for courtesy, and left the rest of the answer hanging in the air. I felt something clearly. The incompleteness of my answer made him more curious, more attentive, even more respectful. I was no longer an easy book to read. I had become a page with lines softly erased, leaving only faint marks others had to strain to see. When I left the bar, I walked slowly along the street, covered in dry leaves. The street lights stretched into long strokes, like scribbles on the ground. I realized something. Holding back is not about hiding. It is about protecting. Protecting myself from unnecessary curiosity. Protecting the young seeds still growing in darkness. Protecting the inner space where I was building pieces of a new life I was not ready to reveal. And as that understanding settled firmly inside me, I knew I had moved to a deeper layer of the journey. No longer just observing, no longer just being patient. Now I was shaping a field of influence, gentle yet sharp, where I could hold the empty spaces of others while protecting the empty spaces of my own. As I walked along the late-season street covered in fallen leaves, a strange feeling rose quietly inside me. Not excitement like when I first discovered something new, not fear like when I first saw the darker corners of myself. It was a kind of calm that was hard to name. As if after months of observing, remaining silent, and holding back, I had stepped into a new territory, a place where the movements of the world were clearer than before, yet no longer pulled me in the way they once did. Throughout that journey, I had not changed the world. I had only changed the way I stood inside it. And that alone changed everything. Not to look down on anyone, but to avoid being dragged into chaos that was never yours to carry. Instead, there was a quiet steadiness I had built slowly, moment by moment, through each silence. One morning, while waiting for coffee in my usual shop, I heard two people behind me talking. They were discussing a new investment opportunity, their voices full of excitement. They spoke quickly, loudly, cutting into each other's points, each trying to prove they knew more. I did not care about the content of their conversation, but I realized something. Their excitement did not come from the opportunity itself. It came from the fear of missing out. That fear made them unable to hear themselves, let alone anyone else. I turned and looked at them for a moment and saw a version of myself that once existed, a version full of noise and uncontrolled reactions. I took my coffee and stepped outside. The fresh morning air made me want to walk around the neighborhood, and as I moved up the worn stone steps, I quietly realized I had gone much farther than I thought. Not in career or finances, but in how I saw the inner workings of people. I no longer chased surface-level movements. I looked into the deeper engines, the thin layers of fear, desire, doubt, and illusion. When you see those layers, you feel as if you are standing on a higher level. Not to look down on anyone, but to avoid being dragged into chaos that was never yours to carry. I noticed this shift most clearly when I observed how I reacted to things that once shook me. A harsh email from a colleague, a sudden message from an old acquaintance, An unexpected opportunity that used to feel urgent, something I believed I had to grab right away. These were the things that once made me rush, worry, tense up, but now they passed by me like soft breezes. Not because I was stronger, but because I no longer let the noisy version of my ego take the wheel. There was one particular afternoon when I sat on a park bench, the city glowing with its golden late daylight. There, I watched a little boy trying to build a small sandcastle, while the wind kept breaking the walls he formed. He tried again and again. What caught my attention was not the failure, but the way he enjoyed each attempt. I once lived as if every small mistake was a final blow, but watching that boy, I felt something clearly. True growth is not about controlling everything. I left the park as the sky darkened, the streetlights flickering on like artificial stars. On the way home, I realized that through each part of this journey, I had shed many layers of myself, layers that once weakened me. The urge to prove myself, the fear of being left behind, the need for praise, the rush to grab things I was not ready to hold, those layers fell away like an outdated coat I no longer wanted to wear. And then one day, I stepped into a meeting room where I once felt small. But this time, that feeling was gone. Not because I was better than anyone there, but because I no longer needed them to confirm that I belonged. I sat in my usual seat, my hands resting lightly on the table, and simply observed. Every glance, every word, every small frown appeared like lines of text I now knew how to read. I knew what they wanted, what they hid, what they tried to strengthen, and what they feared losing. I realized my strength did not come from becoming the most powerful person in the room. It came from no longer being pulled by anyone else's power. I was no longer a piece on the board. I was the board itself. When the meeting ended, a colleague looked at me, hesitated, and said, "You have changed." I only smiled. Not a victorious smile, not a proud one. Just a small smile of someone who understood that the world had not truly changed. I had simply stepped out of the fog that once surrounded me. That night, I went home and stood by my familiar window, overlooking the city, settling into its quiet. Buildings still lit, cars still passing. But inside me, there was another kind of light. A light of agency, calm authority, and a new identity I did not need to announce. I simply felt it, as if it had been waiting there all along for me to tap on the wall between us. I opened my notebook and wrote one sentence. No explanation, no extra words, not a reactor anymore. Those words felt like an ending, but also a beginning. Because this journey does not end at a new position or a new success, but at a new self. A self who does not need to shout to be heard, does not need to run to be seen, does not need to hide to survive. A self who knows how to be still at the right moment, step forward at the right time, be quiet when others are loud, and appear when the world least expects it. I turned off the lights, letting the room sink into its soft darkness. And in that darkness, I felt the clearest truth of all. At last, I was no longer the prey of the world. I did not need to become the hunter. I only needed to become the one who sees both. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. If this message touched your heart, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss the next journey we take together. Your support means the world to me.